The 13th tribe, the Khazar Empire and its heritage. It was, wrote D. Sinor, in the second half of the 8th century that the Khazar Empire reached the acme of its glory. That is, between the conversion of Bulan and the religious reform under Obadiah. This is not meant to imply that the Khazars owed their good fortune to their Jewish religion. It is rather the other way around. They could afford to be Jews because they were economically and militarily strong. A living symbol of their power was the Emperor Leo the Khazar, who ruled Byzantium in 775 through 780, so named after his mother, the Khazar princess Flower, the one who created a new fashion at the court. We remember that her marriage took place shortly after the Great Khazar victory over the Muslims in the Battle of Ardabil, which is mentioned in the letter of Joseph and other sources. The two events, Dunlop remarks, are hardly unrelated. However, amidst the cloak and dagger intrigues of the period, dynastic marriages and betrothals could be dangerous. They repeatedly gave cause, or at least provided a pretext, for starting a war. The pattern was apparently set by Attila the Erst, while overlord of the Khazars. In 450, Attila is said to have received a message, accompanied by an engagement ring, from Honoria, sister to the West Roman Emperor Valentinian III. This romantic and ambitious lady begged the Hun chieftain to rescue her from a fate worse than death, a forced marriage to an old senator, and sent him her ring. Attila promptly claimed her as his bride, together with half the empire as her dowry. And when Valentinian refused, Attila invaded Gaul. Several variations on this quasi-archetypal theme crop up throughout Khazar history. We remember the fury of the Bulgar king about the abduction of his daughter, and how he gave this incident as the main reason for his demand that the Caliph should build him a fortress against the Khazars. If we are to believe the Arab sources, similar incidents, though with a different twist, lead to the last flare-up of the Khazar-Muslim wars at the end of the 8th century, after a protracted period of peace. According to al-Tabari, in 798, the Caliph ordered the governor of Armenia to make the Khazar frontier even more secure by marrying a daughter of the Kagan. This governor was a member of the powerful family of the Barmecides, which incidentally reminds one of the prince of that eponymous family in the Arabian Nights who invited the beggar to a feast consisting of a rich dish covered with nothing beneath. The Barmecide agreed, and the Khazar princess, with her suite and dowry, was duly dispatched to him in a luxurious cavalcade. But she died in childbed. The newborn died too, and her courtiers, on their return to Caesarea, insulated to the Kagan that she had been poisoned. The Kagan promptly invaded Armenia and took, according to two Arab sources, 50,000 prisoners. The Caliph was forced to release thousands of criminals from his gaols and arm them to stem the Khazar advance. The Arab sources relate at least one more 8th century incident of a misfired dynastic marriage followed by a Khazar invasion, and for good measure. The Georgian Chronicle has a particularly gruesome one to add to the list, in which the royal princess, instead of being poisoned, kills herself to escape the Kagan's bed. The details and exact dates are, as usual, doubtful, and so is the real motivation behind these campaigns. But the recurrent mention in the chronicles of bartered bribes and poisoned queens leaves little doubt that this theme had a powerful impact on people's imagination, and possibly also on political events. No more is heard about Khazar Arab fighting after the end of the 8th century. As we enter the 9th, the Khazars seem to enjoy several decades of peace. At least, there is little mention of them in the chronicles, and no news is good news in history. The southern frontiers of their country have been pacified. Relations with the Caliphate had settled down to a tactic non-aggression pact. Relations with Byzantium continue to be definitely friendly. Yet, in the middle of this comparatively idyllic period, there is an ominous episode which foreshadowed new dangers. In 833, or thereabouts, the Khazar Kagan and Bek sent an embassy to the East Roman Emperor Theophilus, asking for skilled architects and craftsmen to build them a fortress on the lower reaches of the Don. The emperor responded with alacrity. He sent a fleet across the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov up the mouth of the Don to the strategic spot where the fortress was to be built. Thus came Sarkel into being, the famous fortress and priceless archaeological site, virtually the only one that yielded clues to Khazar history, until it was submerged in the Tzelyamyaks Reservoir, adjoining the Volga-Don Canal. Constantine Porphyrogentius, who related the episode in some detail, says that since no stones were available in the region, Sarkel was built of bricks, burnt in specifically constructed kilns. He does not mention the curious fact, discovered by Soviet archaeologists while the site was still accessible, that the builders also used marble columns of Byzantine origin, dating from the 6th century and probably salvaged from some Byzantine ruin. A nice example of imperial thrift. The potential enemy against whom this impressive fortress was built by joint Roman-Khazar effort were those formidable and menacing newcomers on the world scene, whom the West called Vikings or Norsemen, and the East called Rus or Rus or Russ. 2 centuries earlier, the conquering Arabs had advanced on the civilized world in a gigantic pincer movement, its left prong reaching across the Pyrenees, its right prong across the Caucasus. Now, during the Viking Age, history seemed to create a kind of mirror image of that earlier phase. The initial explosion, which had triggered off the Muslim wars of conquest, took place in the southernmost region of the known world, the Arabian Desert. The Viking raids and conquest originated in its northernmost region, Scandinavia. The Arabs advanced northward by land, the Norsemen southward by sea and waterways. The Arabs were, at least in theory, conducting a holy war. The Vikings waged unholy wars of piracy and plunder. But the results, as far as the victims were concerned, were much the same. In neither case have historians been able to provide convincing explanations of the economical, ecological, or ideological reasons which transformed these apparently quiescent regions of Arabia and Scandinavia quasi-overnight into volcanoes of exuberant vitality and reckless enterprise. Both eruptions sent their force within a couple of centuries, but left a permanent mark on the world. Both evolved in this time span from savagery and destructiveness to splendid cultural achievement. About the time when Sarkel was built by joint Byzantine Khazar efforts in anticipation of attack by the Eastern Vikings, their western branch had already penetrated all the major waterways of Europe and conquered half of Ireland. Within the next few decades, they colonized Iceland, conquered Normandy, repeatedly sacked Paris, raided Germany, the Rhone Delta, the Gulf of Genoa, circumnavigated the Iberian Peninsula, and attacked Constantinople through the Mediterranean and the Dardanelles, simultaneously with a Rus attack down the Dnieper and across the Black Sea, as Tanobi wrote in the 9th century, which was the century in which the Rose impinged on the Khazars and on the East Romans. The Scandinavians were raided and conquered and colonizing in an immense arc that eventually extended southwestward to North America and southeastward to the Caspian Sea. No wonder that a special prayer was inserted in the litanies of the West. A furrow Norman Norum Libra Nos Domini. No wonder that Constantinople needed its Khazar allies as a protective shield against the carved dragons on the bows of the Viking ships. as it had needed them a couple of centuries earlier against the green banners of the prophet. And, as on that earlier occasion, the Khazars were again to bear the brunt of the attack, and eventually to see their capital laid in ruins. Not only Bizeltum had reason to be grateful to the Khazars for blocking the advance of the Viking fleets down the great waterways from the north, we have now gained a better understanding of the cryptic passage in Joseph's letter to Asadi, written a century earlier. With the help of the Almighty, I guard the mouth of the river and do not permit the Rus, who come in their ships to invade the land of the Arabs. I fight heavy wars with the Rus.